For 300 years, this empire made the world kneel. Cities burned at its command. Kings trembled at its name. Then came a silence. No war drums, no marching armies, just stillness. Inside those walls, something was wrong. Fear spread like poison, loyalty dissolved. Every decision, a mistake. Every alliance, already broken. The darkness didn't invade from outside, it grew from within. This is the final night. An empire built on terror, collapsing in silence. No battle, no warning, no return. The Neo-Assyrian Empire rose from the ashes of its predecessor around 911 BCE, emerging from the northern reaches of Mesopotamia with a hunger that would reshape the ancient world. For nearly 3 centuries, it would become the largest and most powerful empire the world had ever seen, stretching from the mountains of Persia to the banks of the Nile, from the shores of the Mediterranean to the waters of the Persian Gulf. Its heartland lay in what is now northern Iraq, centered around ancient cities whose names still echo through history. Ashur, the spiritual capital, where kings received their divine mandate. Nimrud, the gleaming administrative center. And Nineveh, the crown jewel, the greatest city on earth, whose walls stretched for 12 kilometers and whose population swelled beyond 100,000 souls. This was not an empire built on trade or diplomacy. This was an empire forged in iron and blood. The Assyrians perfected the machinery of war in ways no civilization had attempted before. They developed siege warfare into a science, constructed the first truly professional standing army, and wielded psychological terror as deliberately as they wielded their weapons. The world had seen conquerors before, but it had never seen anything like this. What made the Assyrian military so devastating was its systematic approach to destruction. They invented mobile siege towers, perfected battering rams, and developed engineering corps that could redirect rivers to flood cities or cut off water supplies entirely. Their cavalry units were the most disciplined in the ancient world. Their archers could darken the sky with arrows, while their infantry advanced in formations that would not be matched for centuries. But their most powerful weapon was fear itself. The Assyrians documented their brutality with meticulous care. Palace walls were carved with scenes of impalement, flaying, and mass execution, not hidden away, but displayed prominently for visiting diplomats and tribute-bearing vassals to see. This was intentional. A terrified enemy was an enemy already half defeated. Their policy of mass deportation uprooted entire populations, scattering conquered peoples across the empire to break their cultural identity and prevent future rebellions. Hundreds of thousands were marched from their homelands to distant provinces, their languages mixed, their traditions diluted, their resistance crushed before it could form. And for generations, this strategy worked perfectly. Under Tiglath-Pileser III, the empire transformed from a regional power into an unstoppable force. Under Sargon II, it expanded into new territories with brutal efficiency. Sennacherib rebuilt Nineveh into the most magnificent city the ancient world had ever witnessed, with palaces so vast they contained over 70 rooms, gardens that defied the desert climate, and libraries that preserved knowledge from across the known world. When Esarhaddon conquered Egypt in 671 BCE, the Assyrian Empire reached its absolute zenith. From the highlands of Iran to the pyramids of Giza, one power controlled the crossroads of civilization. Tribute flowed into Nineveh from every direction. Gold, silver, ivory, exotic animals, rare woods, precious stones. The wealth of nations poured into the Assyrian treasury. Kings who had once ruled their own domains now knelt before the Assyrian throne, their crowns removed, their dignity stripped, their kingdoms reduced to provinces. The Mediterranean powers paid tribute rather than face destruction. The mountain tribes of the Zagros submitted rather than be annihilated. Even Egypt, the ancient land of pharaohs, bent its knee to Assyrian authority. This was dominance beyond anything the ancient world had imagined possible. And then came Ashurbanipal, perhaps the most cultured and simultaneously most ruthless ruler in Assyrian history. He built the great library at Nineveh, collecting tablets from across Mesopotamia, preserving literature, science, and medicine for future generations. He was educated, refined, and deeply interested in knowledge. He was also utterly merciless. When Babylon revolted under his own brother in 652 BCE, Ashurbanipal's response was apocalyptic. After a 4-year siege that reduced Babylon's population to cannibalism, the city fell in 648 BCE. Ashurbanipal didn't simply punish the rebellion. He humiliated Babylon to its core, carrying away statues of gods, executing priests, and subjecting survivors to systematic degradation. It seemed like strength. It was actually the beginning of the end. Because Ashurbanipal had done something far more dangerous than winning a war. He had planted a hatred so deep in Babylonian hearts that it would outlast generations. Every Babylonian who survived that siege, every child who grew up hearing stories of the destruction, every priest who remembered the stolen gods, they all carried a wound that would never heal. At that moment, it seemed like decisive victory. In reality, it was a curse written in blood. The empire was also showing cracks that Ashurbanipal either could not or would not address. The constant warfare required enormous resources. The deportation policies, once so effective, had created populations with no loyalty to Assyria scattered across the empire. The professional army, while still formidable, was stretched thin across too many frontiers, and beyond the borders, something dangerous was stirring. To the east, the Medes were uniting under a capable king named Cyaxares. For generations, the Median tribes had been fragmented, easily manipulated, occasionally raided for tribute and slaves. But Cyaxares was different. He reorganized the Median military along Assyrian lines, creating disciplined units where chaos had reigned before. He understood that the key to defeating Assyria was patience and alliance. Meanwhile, in Babylon, a Chaldean general named Nabopolassar was rising to power. He had not forgotten what Ashurbanipal had done to his city. He would never forget. When Ashurbanipal died in 627 BCE, the empire that had seemed invincible suddenly revealed its fragility. His sons immediately plunged into civil war, fighting each other for the throne while their enemies watched and waited. The Babylonians saw their moment. In 626 BCE, Nabopolassar declared independence, and this time there would be no crushing response. The civil war had consumed Assyrian resources and attention. By the time a winner emerged, Sin-shar-ishkun, claiming the throne around 623 BCE, the damage was catastrophic. This was the wrong time to be weakened. This was the wrong time to have enemies unified against you. In 616 BCE, Nabopolassar invaded Assyrian territory directly. The Assyrians fought back, even winning some engagements, but they were no longer facing Babylon alone. Cyaxares had completed his reforms, and the Median army was ready. In 614 BCE, the Medes struck without warning, bypassing the expected targets and marching directly to the ancient city of Ashur, the spiritual heart of the empire, the city from which the god Ashur himself drew his name. Ashur fell. The Assyrians could not believe it. The city that had stood for over 1,000 years, the sacred center of their civilization, was sacked by the Medes. And on the ruins of that holy city, Nabopolassar and Cyaxares met and sealed their alliance with a marriage, uniting Babylon and Media against the wounded empire. Sin-shar-ishkun should have recognized what this meant. He should have consolidated, retreated to defensible positions, sought allies wherever he could find them. Instead, he held on, trusting in the walls of Nineveh, trusting in the strength that had always saved Assyria before. It was a calculation based on the past. The past was already dead. By early 612 BCE, the combined forces of Babylon and Media approached Nineveh. Some accounts suggest the army numbered over 100,000 soldiers, an unprecedented force united by generations of hatred. They came not merely to defeat Assyria, they came to erase it. The siege began in the spring. Nineveh's walls were among the strongest in the ancient world. 15 gates, 18 kilometers of fortification, moats fed by controlled waterways. The city had withstood sieges before. It had never fallen. For 3 months, the walls held. Assyrian defenders fought with the desperation of men who knew what defeat meant. There would be no mercy from enemies who remembered Assyrian cruelty. Every day that the walls stood was another day of hope that something might change. Reinforcements, a plague among the besiegers, divine intervention. Nothing came. And then the rains began. The Tigris River swelled beyond its banks. Water poured through the controlled channels that were supposed to protect the city. Whether through enemy engineering or divine judgment, the ancient sources disagreed. A section of wall collapsed. The floodwaters that had sustained Nineveh for centuries had breached its defenses. The enemy poured through. And now we reach the final hours. The city that had terrorized nations descended into chaos. Smoke rose from every quarter as fires spread through temples and palaces and homes. Screams echoed through streets that had once paraded the treasures of conquered kingdoms. The population that had lived in the capital of the world now fled through alleyways, seeking escape routes that did not exist. In the palace, Sin-Shar-Ishkun made his final choice. He would not be paraded in chains through Babylon. He would not be flayed alive before jeering crowds. He would not give his enemies that satisfaction. He ordered the palace set ablaze. With his family, his court, and his treasures, the last king of Assyria died in flames of his own making. Outside, the slaughter continued through the night. Soldiers who had conquered nations were cut down in the streets. Priests who had proclaimed Assyria's divine right to rule were dragged from temples. The wealth of 3 centuries was looted or destroyed. The great library, the repository of human knowledge, collapsed into ash and rubble. By morning, Nineveh was silent. The city that had ruled the world lay in ruins so complete that within 2 centuries, people would walk over its mounds without knowing what lay beneath. Alexander the Great would march past the site, unaware he was passing the greatest city of a vanished age. A few remnants held out. Ashur-uballit II, claiming the throne of a kingdom that no longer existed, retreated to Haran with survivors. He called for help. Egypt, surprisingly, answered, recognizing that a world without Assyria might be worse than a world with it. But Egypt arrived too late. In 609 BCE, Haran fell. The pharaoh's forces could not reverse what had already been decided. The last Assyrian army was destroyed on the banks of the Euphrates. 300 years of dominance ended not with a final battle, but with a whimper. Scattered survivors hunted through foreign lands, a royal line extinguished, cities so thoroughly destroyed that history itself would lose them until archaeologists rediscovered them in the 19th century. The Neo-Assyrian Empire did not merely fall, it vanished. The civilization that had defined power, that had written its cruelties on palace walls for all to see, was swallowed by the very darkness it had once wielded against others. No return, no revival, no legacy but dust and broken stones. And somewhere beneath the soil of modern Iraq, the ruins of Nineveh still lie in silence, a reminder that even the mightiest walls cannot stand forever against the weight of accumulated hatred, the patience of enemies, and the slow, inevitable turning of time.